Alert! All 9 of the main Star Wars movies will be spoiled. This is your one and only warning, Rebel.
So Rise of Skywalker is finally out, and the Skywalker Saga is at last over. Yeah, I still feel a little dirty when I say that, because I'm still of the opinion that Return of the Jedi should have been the end of the Skywalker Saga. If you ask me, the Disney trilogy should have started a new story, but it didn't, and so here we are. I figure I'd do a review of each and every one of the main 9 movies in chronological order, which of course we start with...
Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace!
The Phantom Menace, the one that started the whole story, essentially. This story receives a lot of flack, but I think it's mostly an okay movie. Let's just go ahead and get the bad aspects out of the movie first. Yes, Jar Jar Binks is a very stupid comic relief character. Now, I wouldn't exactly say he's one of the worst, though, primarily because his role as being the stupid gag character, and he didn't really irritate me, he got more of a passive eye roll from me. I understand his accent must really tick people off because of how it sounds, but I just saw him as the stupid one and mostly ignored him. Now we must talk about 2 other negative aspects that irked me a lot more. Anakin's mother saying she simply had him like the Force was his father. I joke that she must have done the deed with so many men that she simply can't remember which one it could have been.
Even Yoda's son, Anakin, may be.
The other negative is that this is where midichlorians are first brought up, that divisive attempt to convolutedly explain the Force. I would compare it to Star Trek, but it's not like Star Trek attempts to explain Q's powers because some things are just best left a mystery. Basically, the movie starts with Anakin as a kid. After a negotiation goes wrong, Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan have to get the hell out of Dodge, fighting through droids and meeting up with Jar Jar to go lead them into the underwater city of Naboo. They fail to get the leader to help them, but Jar Jar guides them on an underwater transport to Theed. After saving Padme, Naboo's 14-year-old queen, they're off, but they have to stop at Tatooine with their ship damaged. They quickly discover that the Republic currency is useless on Tatooine, so Qui-Gon decides to wager in on a pod race, throwing in Anakin's freedom, believing he's the chosen one. Anakin ends up using the Force to guide him and win the pod race despite his opponent cheating, and they're off with Anakin to be trained to be a Jedi. Qui-Gon does end up running into Darth Maul, but he ends up escaping. After dropping Padme off at Coruscant, Qui asks the Jedi Council for permission to train Anakin, but the Council declines Anakin for Yoda thinks he has too much fear in him. I'm honestly not sure if this is intentional or not, but they really make the Jedi Council seem like rigid jerks in a way.
Emotions humans must not have. Act like emotional robots they must.
Qui-Gon basically tells them to shove it and has Anakin as his new disciple, with Obi-Wan to take the trials to become a Jedi Knight. Jar Jar ends up becoming a general for some reason. Qui-Gon tells Anakin to wait in a starfighter, but accidentally sends it into autopilot and causes the control ship's hangar to be destroyed, while trying to spin, which is apparently a neat trick. While this is going on, Darth Maul fights Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, being freezed but not before wounding Qui-Gon. Before giving himself to the Force, so to speak, Qui-Gon asks Obi-Wan to train Anakin, and Palpatine subsequently becomes the Chancellor. Yoda finally begrudgingly accepts Anakin as Obi-Wan's apprentice, who himself is now a Jedi Knight. All in all, I thought Phantom Menace was a pretty okay movie. I'm sure at the time it seemed like a huge step down compared to Return of the Jedi, and it's the weakest of the first 6 movies, but it wasn't terrible by any means. If you could redub Anakin's mom talking about the Force being his dad because that's just stupid, cut out midichlorians and maybe redub Jar Jar to have a less stereotypical voice, I think it could have been better, but it still wasn't that bad. I think people gave it way too bad of a rap, or maybe I'm just way too forgiving. Either way, next up is...
Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones!
Now this is probably going to step on some people's toes because I actually liked Attack of the Clones as a whole. Yeah, I know the budding romance was fairly cringy and awkward as hell, but it had some good action and a good progression of events. It starts 10 years after Phantom Menace with an assassination attempt on Padme's life, with Obi-Wan and Anakin thwarting Zam, but she's killed before she can reveal the identity of the bounty hunter that put her up to it. Obi-Wan soon discovers an army of clones being manufactured and fights with Jango, who he suspects to be that bounty hunter in question. Meanwhile, we see the first slip towards the dark side for Anakin as he heads to Tatooine for his mother, and failing to save her, he gets enraged and proceeds to chop down every Tusken Raider, apparently even women and children. Meanwhile, Count Dooku makes his move with a droid army. Obi-Wan is subdued, and Chancellor Palpatine convinces Jar Jar to propose a vote to give him emergency power. With this newfound authority, he authorizes the clone army while Anakin and Padme go to rescue Obi-Wan, but Jango captures them too. However, the newly formed clone army led by the Jedi save the trio before they're put to death, and Jango is subsequently killed. Obi-Wan and Anakin fight Dooku, but Anakin's right arm is sliced off in the process. Yoda shows up and fights off Dooku, but Dooku uses a distraction and just flees. Anakin secretly marries Padme after getting a robotic hand, and it's the beginning of the Clone Wars, not to be confused with the 2 cartoons that would spawn from it. Taken as a whole, I thought Attack of the Clones was pretty good. When the clone troops show up for battle, it got pretty gripping, and it was especially interesting to see the little shrimpy Yoda kick some ass. It does a pretty good job showing both how the Emperor started his rise to power, as well as Anakin becoming more perverted by the dark side, especially that massacre of the Tusken Raiders. There are certainly some problems, such as Anakin being a little too whiny for comfort, but it still does an effective job showing an arc. I definitely consider it an improvement to the Phantom Menace, and it gave birth to such classics as the Clone Wars cartoon and Republic Commando, so how could you hate something like that? Of course, every trilogy needs a finale, and it's time for Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith! This one is where things really start to get real and complete the path to darkness, not just for Anakin, but for the entire Star Wars universe. It takes place 3 years after Attack of the Clones, where Obi-Wan's become a Jedi Master and Anakin a Jedi Knight and is on a mission to save Palpatine from General Grievous, a cyborg separatist. In harnessing his anger, Anakin manages to defeat Dooku and Palpatine gently convinces him to behead Dooku.
Do it.
With Dooku dead, there's a brief fight with General Grievous before he escapes. As they arrive on Coruscant via a crash landing, Anakin learns that Padme is pregnant and is both happy and afraid, largely because he starts having nightmares of her dying in childbirth. Desperate to avoid this, he turns to Palpatine, who begins truly tempting Anakin by telling him about the power to avert death. Unfortunately, this is also where he starts talking about midichlorians again. Much like with the Phantom Menace, a redubbing of this would have gone a long way. Just get rid of the midichlorians and we're good. The Council suspects Palpatine's motives and asks Anakin to spy on him to his chagrin. This is where Anakin begins to think the Jedi Council is abusing their power, but goes along with it and tells them they were right about Palpatine being a Sith Master. However, Anakin's time with Palpatine has caused him to become reliant on him and even grow fond of him. When Windu confronts Palpatine with 3 Jedi Masters, the Emperor kills the 3, but Windu manages to reflect his Force lightning, presumably melting off a Sith mask the Emperor was using, which reveals his actual face. I say presumably because that's just a theory, that he used alchemy to fashion a more presentable face and his ugliness was actually the result of using the dark side of the Force so much. Given the look that we see on Anakin's face later on in the movie, I can sort of see where they're coming from with that. Before Windu can finish off Palpatine, however, Anakin intervenes by cutting off Windu's hand, and Palpatine, who faked being weak, suddenly uses Force lightning to send him out a window. Anakin decides to join Palpatine, even though Palpatine just gleefully murdered a Jedi Master right in front of him, but I guess he now believes the Jedi are the ones who are evil. I do admit, I find it a little jarring, though, that Anakin goes from not wanting to kill Palpatine because it's not the Jedi way, to suddenly slaying the Jedi children in the temple. It seems like there should be a few steps between being a Jedi and then suddenly killing off kids, but I guess they were running out of time or something. Honestly, it's like he didn't even consider the possibility of them turning to the dark side. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan has a fight with Grievous, and after literally hanging on the edge, uses a blaster to pretty gruesomely fry Grievous' insides and kill him. This is also kind of a neat callback to New Hope, where old Obi-Wan detests blasters in favor of more civilized lightsabers, which the young Obi-Wan voices disgust over having to use. Unfortunately, this victory is short-lived as Palpatine sends an order to the clone troops, Order 66. This causes the clone troops to turn on the Jedi. This is easily the darkest and saddest moment in the entire series, as clone troops all around suddenly turn on the Jedi. Obi-Wan and Yoda obviously managed to escape, although Obi-Wan actually took refuge in the water until it was all over and done, and Yoda even had to flee, but most of the others weren't so lucky. It's really tragic watching so many die by the clone army that was once taking orders from them. Making matters worse for poor Obi-Wan is that he had to find out later via security footage that it was Anakin who killed the temple children. Obi-Wan really doesn't want to have to fight Anakin, but Yoda insists he's no match for Palpatine and that Yoda must fight the Twisted Emperor himself, so Obi-Wan reluctantly agrees. While Yoda and the Emperor have a surprisingly badass fight, with Yoda having to flee following a stalemate, Anakin follows Palpatine's orders to betray the Separatists, deeming them no longer necessary. Anakin soon reunites with Padme, who's concerned about him because of what Obi-Wan told her. While Padme and Obi-Wan are just there to help him see reason, Anakin jumps to the conclusion that Padme is conspiring against him and force chokes her. It's definitely ironic for someone who joined Palpatine in the first place so he could protect her, but this one is actually pretty believable. Obi-Wan then proceeds to fight Anakin, clearly trying to get Anakin back down several times, but Anakin's too far gone. After failing to heed Obi-Wan's very mimetic warning of the high ground, Anakin jumps at him but proceeds to have his limbs slashed off and then soon have his body caught on fire by the nearby lava. Obi-Wan's actor definitely deserves some kind of award for this scene. You can really feel his gut-wrenching when he talks about how much he loved Anakin as a brother. However, Palpatine soon senses that Anakin is in danger and salvages him to get him medical attention, getting him into the iconic Darth Vader suit we all know and love. The irony sinks in as the new Darth Vader learns that he killed Padme in his anger. It seems that dying in childbirth was a self-fulfilling prophecy, and Vader loses it, screaming out in anguish. Now, the original explanation for Padme's death is indeed very stupid, that she died of a broken heart. Thankfully, this is retconned into her having microfractions in her throat that the alien doctors weren't able to detect. Seriously, lady, you've got 2 kids. Don't just give up the ghost willingly. Honestly, with all its faults, it was still the best of the prequel trilogy, which is good. I think it's safe to say that they did better with each release, and Revenge of the Sith does a great job showing the horror of the new Empire while giving a small glimmer of hope at the end. Leia and Luke are decided to be separated, with Obi-Wan deciding to stay in Tatooine with Luke to watch over him. With the prequel trilogy now finally over, I must say it was a lot better than people gave it credit for. Is it particularly good? No, not by a long shot, and it's especially nowhere near as good as the iconic original trilogy. However, it still told a pretty good story, and the worst elements are pretty minor overall. With some redubbing and maybe selective cuts, you could easily remove those negative aspects and make it a lot better. Not even Jar Jar Binks could stop me from having a good time with them. I think it's safe to say that George Lucas is a good writer, but he needs other people to help him direct. You can see that with the original trilogy, leading us into Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope! And now we've come to the big daddy of them all, the one that started the entire series. When it first came out, it was simply called Star Wars, but in light of the prequels, it's now called Episode 4: A New Hope. This is truly the movie that would start a legacy, and while George Lucas needed some editors to clear up some clutter and the special editions that partially eroded it, it's still a beautiful movie that kick-started a legacy. It starts out with this at-the-time mysterious figure, Darth Vader, infiltrating Princess Leia's ship to stop her from delivering stolen Death Star plans to the rebellion forces. However, before her capture, Leia manages to record a message on R2-D2 for Obi-Wan. R2-D2, along with the sassy robot C-3PO, escape on an escape pod with the Empire just believing it's empty because there's no life signals. I guess it's good that in a universe where droids are a thing, they didn't have any sensors for them, but sure, whatever, it was the first one. The droids reach Tatooine, where they're taken in by Jawas and subsequently purchased by Luke's uncle, Owen. His uncle intends to put them to work, but R2-D2 shows Luke part of Leia's message concerning Obi-Wan, but refuses to show any more than that. Subsequently, R2 goes off in search of Obi-Wan, but he has a run-in with some Sand People. When Luke finds R2 and the Sand People are scared off by a noise made by the person Luke knows, known as Uncle Ben. As it turns out, this crazy old man is actually Obi-Wan, the one Leia's message was intended for. After getting the whole message and giving Luke Anakin's old lightsaber, you know, that one he killed the kids with, Obi-Wan informs Luke that Darth Vader betrayed and killed Anakin. While Luke does want to join the Resistance, he knows he has to stay with his aunt and uncle. However, while searching for the droids, the stormtroopers murder the 2 of them and Luke finds their charred corpses. Now fueled with passion, Luke and Obi-Wan set off for a bar, Obi-Wan first demonstrating the Jedi mind trick on some stormtroopers to convince them that these are not, in fact, the droids they were looking for. You will now give a like on this video and recommend it to all your friends. After lightsabering off the arm of some alien that was getting a little too uppity with Luke, Obi-Wan and him find Han Solo right after he's confronted by Greedo. After a brief talk in which Han shoots Greedo first before he can fire at him, and yes, that's what happened, George Lucas, Obi-Wan hires Han as an escort. Obi-Wan offers him 17,000 credits, 2K in advance and 15 among arrival. This goes horribly wrong, however, as Vader decides to destroy Alderaan, their destination, and uses a tractor beam to send the crew aboard. Stormtroopers then investigate the Falcon, and Solo makes use of a smuggling hideaway to ambush 2 of them and take their armor for himself and Luke. Gotta love the old take out the guards and put on their clothes routine, but hey, don't fix it if it ain't broken. It's decided that Obi-Wan will set out to disable the tractor beam while Han and Luke go to save Leia. After making it to the prison cell and after a radio conversation goes bad, which was a boring conversation anyway, Luke finds Leia, who comments unfavorably about his height before the reveal that he's not a stormtrooper. Leia is understandably not interested in Luke because Luke isn't the center of the universe, but instantly becomes interested when Obi-Wan is brought up and they move to make their escape. Unfortunately, a squad of stormtroopers take their position, and while Han and Luke are busy fending them off, Leia blasts a grate and they head into a garbage compactor. Thankfully, they manage to radio R2-D2 and get him to open the door. While this is going on, Obi-Wan confronts Vader himself. This is where the movie's age shows itself a bit, as Vader's fight with Obi-Wan is a little on the stiff side. It's nothing too jarring, mind you, but I'd recommend you check out FX and in post reimagining of the fight. It's truly beautiful. As the others make it to the Falcon, Obi-Wan allows himself to be struck down, and while Luke is initially outraged and tries to shoot the stormtroopers, Obi-Wan tells him in spirit to just get the hell out of there. After fighting through TIE fighters, they make it to Rebel base and get the Death Star planes from R2-D2. They construct a plan to destroy the Death Star through its exhaustive weak point, with Luke offhandedly mentioning that he's killed womp rats the size of it. This is good as it gives Luke a reason for already being good at piloting, which note is the only thing he's good at up to this point. We see him train for a bit with a lightsaber with Obi-Wan earlier, but he's obviously not that good with it just yet. Unfortunately, Vader intentionally let them escape so he could find the base and blow it to Kingdom Come with the Death Star, so now they're on a time crunch. Luke's friends in the trenches are unfortunately all shot down by TIE fighters, one man by Vader himself. Luke himself is about to be picked off when Han appears in the Falcon, showing he really does care about more than money and guns down Vader. With that, Luke trusts in his instincts and uses the Force for the first time to guide his missiles into the exhaust, destroying the Death Star once and for all. Or so we think. Leia gives Han and Luke medals, although not Chewie because it's explained later that his species has a different kind of custom and the movie is over. The worst thing I can really criticize the movie for is being a little on the age side. Well, that and some of the special edition changes range from unnecessary to just straight up detrimental. Han shot first. Still, A New Hope is a great movie and really shows that Lucas hit the ground running on the series from the very beginning. Him bypassing a race to get rights to the series was clearly one of the best decisions he's ever made. It's because of this movie that the series even exists in the first place. I'd recommend it as a must-watch even if you didn't like Star Wars, because it's earned its place in cinema history. Of course, it isn't over yet. This fabulous movie needed a sequel, and that leads us into Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back! After A New Hope is arguably the best movie in the entire series, The Empire Strikes Back. It takes place a whopping 3 years after A New Hope, with the Empire successfully licked its wounds and is now ready to, as the title implied, strike back. The rebels fled to the planet Hoth, but with the use of probe droids, Vader manages to successfully locate them and is ready to begin a new offensive. In the meantime, Luke discovers the probe but is knocked out by a Wampa. When he wakes up, he's stuck to the ceiling of an ice cave with the Wampa. In any case, Luke manages to grab his lightsaber with the Force, cut off the Wampa's arm, and make his escape where he sees a vision of Obi-Wan and passes out to the cold. I'll admit the added Wampa footage was a nice touch to the special edition. This is one of the times where it actually does help a lot. Han left to look for Luke on a Tauntaun, but even it can't handle the blizzard and subsequently dies. Thankfully, Han manages to find Luke, and he cuts open the Tauntaun to let Luke rest in its squishy, comfortably warm guts, which the Mythbusters actually proved is possible. And he thought they smelled bad on the outside. Han erects a little shelter, and in the morning the two are saved and sent back to base. Luke is placed in a Bacta tank, which I swear is what inspired the healing chambers on Dragon Ball Z to heal himself up. Leia wants Han to stay, which Han interprets as Leia having the hots for her. Not only does Leia reject this, but she frenches Luke to spite him, which is a little weird when you learn that they're siblings. Let's just say thank God they never took it any farther than that, wink wink. In any case, the probe detects life and Vader knows it's them, forcing the rebellion to flee again. Of course, they have to hold off the attacking forces in the meantime while they evacuate their forces. They're soon under fire by AT-STs and AT-ATs, with the AT-ATs too durable for blaster fire, so Luke has the brilliant idea to tie up its legs with cables. I guess it's a good thing nobody told the Empire about tank treads because it works and the thing quickly goes down. After destroying another AT with the same method along with a good old thermal detonator, unfortunately the rebels find their power generator destroyed by General Veers. Leia, Han, and the others get away on the Falcon to escape from Vader, who had just arrived. Luke, meanwhile, uses his X-Wing to head to the Dagobah system as per Obi-Wan's instruction to find Master Yoda. After crash landing in a swamp there, he finds a crazy old alien who starts stringing Luke along, much to his chagrin. Luke quickly loses his patience, and he reveals himself to be the Yoda that Luke was searching for. Initially, Yoda refuses to train Luke due to his impatience, but Obi-Wan convinces them that he was like that once, and Yoda relents. Let me take a moment here to find it funny how some people insist that Luke was a Mary Sue. Up until this point, he had to be saved by Han, twice, is only really good at piloting so far, and Yoda just scolded him for being impatient. What part of Luke is a Mary Sue? His weaknesses are put on full display, and he's treated as somewhat of a kid whom the universe doesn't revolve around. He destroyed the Death Star in the first movie, sure, but that was at the expense of his friends, and Han still had to bail him out. Sorry about that, I just find it really weird when people have to call Luke a Mary Sue. Okay, back to the movie. As Yoda trains Luke, including how dangerous the dark side is, Yoda has him enter a cave steeped in dark force power. Luke decides to enter with his lightsaber against Yoda's advice and fights an image of Darth Vader, managing to take his head off, but then the mask breaks and reveals Luke's own face underneath. It's an early warning of how Luke and Vader really aren't so different, and that if he gives into his emotions, he'll become lost to the dark side. Later on, Luke becomes distracted by his X-Wing, and he gives up any hope of getting it out because it had submerged so much. Yoda insists that with the Force he can do it, but Luke fails to get it out. Luke objects to the possibility of getting the X-Wing out, forcing Yoda to demonstrate otherwise by using the Force himself to get the X-Wing out. Luke still can't believe it, which Yoda of course replies with,
"It's why you fail."
This obviously demonstrates that Luke's understanding of the Force is still incredibly shallow. While all of this is going down, the Falcon has to get away from TIE fighters with Han unable to jump to light speed due to the hyperdrive being busted. Instead, he seeks refuge in the asteroids and lands in a cavern to recoup. As Leia is attempting to make repair efforts, a slick Han manages to get a kiss out of her, first showing that they have a thing for each other. Vader orders his squad to sweep the asteroid field to find the Falcon, but it doesn't go too well for one of the Star Destroyers, which is promptly destroyed itself. This is where we first see not only a glimpse of what Vader looks like under the mask, but Palpatine as he informs Vader of a new enemy, Luke, while Vader believes he can be turned. With the hyperdrive unable to be repaired, Han turns to his friend Lando in Cloud City. However, he soon finds out that Lando sold him out to Vader because the Empire got there first and Lando wanted to remain independent of the Empire. After torturing Leia and Han to get a reaction out of Luke, Vader then freezes Han to test out the carbon freezing chamber just to make sure it'll be safe to use on Luke. Luckily for Han, it manages to work without any complications, and Boba takes him to Jabba to settle Han's outstanding debts from the first movie. At the objection of Yoda, Luke abandons his training in an attempt to go and save them. After escaping from Boba Fett, he tries to save the others despite Leia warning him it's a trap, but then he runs into Vader in the carbon freezing chamber where the two duke it out. Luke hasn't trained for very long, of course, so it's a pretty one-sided fight, and Vader ends up chopping Luke's hand off before making that famous cinematic reveal,
I am your father.
Meanwhile, Cloud City security intervene and free Lando and Leia's group by attacking the Empire's troops. Chewie is ready to chew Lando's head off after what happened to Han, but Lando convinces him that Han is still alive and can still be saved. Getting a new robotic hand just like his father did before him, Luke looks out and both him and Vader know it's not over yet. They're in a bad place, but at least they got away and now it's time to save Han. And that is The Empire Strikes Back, a very excellent follow-up to A New Hope, and I can agree with the consensus that it's the best among the main movies as well as the best part of the series, period. The fighting is improved, both lightsabering and in the air. It has some pretty shocking twists like Lando's ambiguous loyalty and the whole Vader being Luke's father thing and the overall twists and turns along the way. Obviously, it's a must-watch for anyone who hasn't watched it already, even though the big plot twist has been spoiled 6 ways from Sunday by now. With this fabulous movie out of the way, the series naturally needed a finale, which brings us to Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi! Now this is the big payoff of the original trilogy, where it all accumulates into one final call. The Empire may have struck back, but now it's time for the Jedi to return and reclaim their legacy. It starts out with Vader's intentions to construct a new Death Star to replace the old one. Yeah, that may feel a bit samey, but it has a different feeling to it since this one isn't actually finished yet. One of the higher-ups initially complains about being understaffed, but when Vader informs him the Emperor will be coming personally, he commits to double their efforts. As intimidating as Vader is, they're much more afraid of the Emperor than they are of him, which nicely foreshadows his appearance. Meanwhile, the attempt to rescue Han is underway, starting with C-3PO and R2-D2 showing up with a message from Luke offering the two droids in exchange for Han's release. Ever the graceful host, Jabba takes the two but is unwilling to give up on his prize. Jabba commands one of his slave girls, Ula, to his throne and drops her in the Rancor's pit when she resists. The look on her face really shows the Rancor is a beast to be trifled with, and while they don't show it just yet, it's a great example of foreshadowing. Next up is Leia, who disguises herself as a bounty hunter and bargains with Jabba through C-3PO to sell Chewie to him. After threatening Jabba's life with a thermal detonator, he relents out of respect and amusement and accepts her price. While escorting Chewie into the cell, Leia sets Han free, although he's blind from hibernation sickness, but they're captured by Jabba, with Leia becoming a new slave girl. At last, Luke arrives himself, interestingly in a black cloak, which makes him look a little bit more like the Emperor. It's a nice little visual cue that Luke is flirting with the dark side. We see the results of his training as he's able to use the Jedi mind trick. Unfortunately, on his way into Jabba's palace, he's found out and he demands the release of his friends, but Jabba refuses. Luke force grabs a blaster to use against him, but Jabba drops him into the Rancor pit and we see the ugly monstrosity for the first time. After it eats an unfortunate guard that fell in with Luke, he manages to defeat it by throwing the skull of one of its victims at the door controls, crushing it like a bug. However, things are still not over yet, as Jabba's backup plan is to send them into the man-eating Sarlacc to be digested over the course of 1,000 years. How someone would stay in that long without dying of dehydration, starvation, and old age is anyone's guess, but maybe it somehow keeps them alive just to torment them. Han's still half blinded, but is starting to get his sight back, and Luke gives Jabba one last chance before things get ugly. Naturally, this falls on deaf ears, and as Luke's ushered off the plank, he force flips up and R2-D2 launches him his new lightsaber that it was storing inside his body. Boba Fett soon enters the fray, but Luke cuts his blaster in half and Chewie knocks him to the ground. I should also mention that Lando was there in disguise, and he almost gets knocked into the Sarlacc himself before they save him. Boba tries to re-enter the fray, but Han accidentally hits his jetpack and sends him crashing into the Sarlacc, who promptly eats him. The nice thing about this is that since it takes so long to digest its victims, one could feasibly say he got out somehow and use it to include him in more stories if they wanted to. Meanwhile, Leia proceeds to take her chain and strangle Jabba to death with it, ironically using the very tool of her subjugation to earn her freedom. Clearly, anyone who says Star Wars has never had badass female characters before hasn't been paying close enough attention. After beating the rest of the guards, they make their escape and depart for Sullust, except Luke, who returns to Yoda via his X-Wing to fulfill his promise. When he arrives, Yoda is unfortunately at death's door and tells him he doesn't need any further training. Yoda finally admits that Vader was Luke's father and that he must confront him, and dies to become one with the Force just as Kenobi did. Obi-Wan's Force Ghost admits the truth and that what he told him was in fact true,
from a certain point of view,
while also admitting he has a twin sister. Luke knows somehow that it's Leia, and Kenobi warns him not to let his emotions get the better of him. The Emperor finally arrives on the Death Star to appraise the Death Star construction after this. He compliments Vader, who assures them that Luke will come to them and that he'll come to the dark side just as the Emperor foresaw. This is the first time we see him in the flesh, and the cinematography definitely complements it all. This is a man you will learn to respect unless you want to die a horrible death. Meanwhile, the rebels have a plan to take out the shield generator on the moon of Endor, protecting the Death Star. Vader knows that Luke's on there through the Force and takes off for the planet. After speeding off on bikes to get away from stormtrooper scouts and look for Leia, who was captured by Ewoks. The rest of them fall into a trap, and while R2-D2 manages to get them out, they're still taken prisoner. Luckily, they see C-3PO as some kind of god, so with some hesitation, C-3PO exploits this to get them to let the gang go, Luke using the Force to further convince them of C-3PO's divinity. Luke then makes the decision to turn himself into Vader, knowing that he has to face him once and for all, and knowing that him being there will jeopardize the mission. Meanwhile, the Ewoks have agreed to join in the fight against the Empire. While being escorted to the shuttle, Luke tries to convince Vader to turn to the side of good and that there's still a spark of hope left in him. However, this falls on deaf ears as Vader believes he's beyond redemption, and they're soon taken to the Emperor. The Emperor reveals that he allowed them to carry out this plan so that they would fall into another trap, and that he was 5 steps ahead of them this entire time. This quickly rings true as the group on Endor are taken prisoner and the forces in the air realize the shield is still up. The Empire's fleet appears with, of course, Akbar delivering that famous line.
It's a trap!
Thankfully, Ewoks come to the rescue for the gang, and the stormtroopers proceed to get their metal-encased asses handed to them by the deadliest teddy bears in all of sci-fi. They manage to reach the bunker, but Luke's unaware of this and begins to buy into the Emperor's claims that they're all doomed. You can really feel Luke's struggle to try to remain calm. This inevitably fails as Luke eventually succumbs to anger and attacks the Emperor with his lightsaber, but Vader, presumably realizing that Luke would be lost to the dark side if he did this, defends the Emperor and proceeds to fight him himself. While Luke is obviously much more trained this time around, he's hesitant to fight Vader and he even hides. Vader has to prod him by mentioning that he has a sister and threatening her. Luke takes the bait, goes absolutely ballistic, and suddenly hammers Vader with blows, even cutting off his right hand, which is revealed to be mechanical. Palpatine wants Luke to kill Vader and take his place, but seeing that Vader also has an artificial hand, he snaps out of it and refuses. The Emperor becomes absolutely furious and starts painfully electrocuting Luke with Force lightning. It really is a gripping part of the movie. You can feel Luke's pain as he throttles on the ground. He begs Vader to help him, and Vader's conflicted about which one he should be working with. Eventually, good prevails and all that stuff, and he makes the right choice and grabs Palpatine from behind, throwing him down a shaft. However, Darth Vader's life support systems were fried from contact with the Force lightning, and he's slowly dying. Luke tries to carry him to a shuttle, but Vader knows his time is up. He asks for Luke to remove his helmet so that he can see his son with his own 2 eyes before he dies. Luke relents, and Vader, now Anakin Skywalker, tells his son to leave and that his efforts to save him were already successful. It's a nice little heartwarming and heartbreaking moment. Meanwhile, the attempt to knock out the shield generator was a complete success, and the fleet manages to make their counter-move, entering the Death Star through the incompleted parts and heading to the core to destroy it once and for all. Luke manages to take Anakin's body out of the Death Star via shuttlecraft. Han legitimately believes that Leia's into Luke, but after telling the clueless Han that Luke is in fact her brother, Leia kisses Han and their budding relationship is now complete. With the Emperor finally dead for good and the second Death Star destroyed, Anakin's body is cremated and the galaxy rejoices. With that, the horror is finally over, or at least it should have been, but we'll get to that later. Return of the Jedi may have some light problems like reusing the Death Star, and Ewoks can be divisive, although I was fine with them, but the good far outweighs the bad in my opinion, and Luke getting those bonding moments and saving his father, while a bit cliche, were very touching. It was a very powerful end to a very powerful trilogy and cemented Star Wars' place in history. This is obviously another must-watch. If I have to nitpick about the original trilogy, it's that a lot of the special edition fixes were completely unnecessary. Obviously, to start out with, George Lucas was way off base about Han shooting first. Greedo makes his intentions of killing Han very clear. Being faster on the draw doesn't make him a bad guy, more like a cowboy. A lot of the CGI also hasn't aged all that well, although the windows added to Cloud City and touch-ups to the lightsaber in New Hope were very greatly appreciated. That's honestly about all I can say bad about the original trilogy without really going deep into the nitpicks. It's a great series of movies and I highly recommend it. However, while this story was believed to have ended, that's all changed now thanks to the emergence of a new empire donning mouse ears, and it's time we come to Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens! The Force Awakens begins the new Disney era of the equation, for better or worse. It begins 30 years after Return of the Jedi with a new villain, Kylo Ren, with his copycat empire called the First Order. Luke isn't in the fight because he's just flat out missing entirely. Already, this is where my first gripe with the Disney trilogy comes into play. They seem to love beating up on Luke. His importance seems to be greatly diminished in this new trilogy, despite him ultimately responsible for the Empire's collapse, albeit with some help along the way. Instead, Leia gets the big spotlight as she sends Poe to Jakku to a village elder who has a map to Luke Skywalker's location. Naturally, things go wrong as the First Order attacks, even some with flamethrowers. Poe attempts to get away, but his X-Wing's promptly shot down, so he gives the map to BB-8 and has them get the hell out of Dodge. FN-2003 is shot by Poe, and when FN-2187 goes to save him, it's too late and he dies in his arms after wiping blood on his helmet. After Kylo angrily kills Tekka due to him knowing his real identity, Poe tries to shoot him, but Kylo stops the blast mid-air with the Force, and Poe is subsequently captured. Kylo then orders the villagers to be slaughtered, and FN-2187 is traumatized by this. He takes off his helmet inside an empty shuttle, but Captain of the Stormtroopers Phasma scolds him for this and is suspicious about him not firing on the villagers. Because of this, he makes the decision to bail. Meanwhile, Kylo attempts to torture Poe before finally using a mind probe force ability, which kinda makes the torture unnecessary if he could just do that, but you know, angsty teenager gonna angst. Kylo finally learns about BB-8 holding the map and they're off to locate it. Mr. Bailey Stormtrooper frees Poe and the two of them make their escape, stealing a TIE fighter and blasting their way out. FN-2187 refers to his name and number, which Poe decides to just call him Finn because of the FN, and they're off to Jakku, crash landing in the desert near it. Thinking he's dead after finding only his jacket, Finn wanders off. While this is going down, the focus is then drawn to a scavenger named Rey, who is picking through a destroyed Star Destroyer. It seems she's tasked with collecting scrap and selling it for food portions while also living in a scrapped AT-AT unit. She finds BB-8 fighting against a scavenger and saves it, with BB-8 wanting to travel with her. Somehow, by the gods of Star Wars, Rey can already interpret BB-8 because I guess she's C-3PO now and can translate languages. Soon after, Finn makes his way to a trough as being in the desert has understandably left him quite parched. Unfortunately, BB-8 assumes that Finn's a thief since he's wearing Poe's jacket, and it and Rey give chase with Rey going for the attack. There are some implications about here with them assuming he's a thief, but I'm not going to get into that. Finn explains the situation, but they're interrupted by the First Order appearing for the droid. Finding the Millennium Falcon after their first choice was shot down, they managed to escape with Rey piloting and Finn manning the gun. This is yet another of many plot-convenient abilities for Rey. While Luke was good at piloting, it's never said that Rey actually piloted anything she scrapped. One thing that's kind of funny is that while Kylo is clearly a ripoff of Vader, he acts more like prequel Anakin because when he finds out they escaped, he goes on a temper tantrum. Meanwhile, the Falcon is caught in a tractor beam and it's revealed to be Han and Chewie. They find Rey and Finn, mistaking them for thieves. This is the second time that Finn is believed to be a thief for no reason. I think there's starting to be a little bit of a connection here, but the situation is explained to them and they agree to help. Unfortunately, Han is once again facing money problems as two gangs come by to collect. Because what even is character development in Return of the Jedi? I guess it meant absolutely nothing and he's back to his old ways again. Well, either that or he managed to evade them for 30 years. Either way, Rey and Finn are hidden in the corridors to avoid having to get involved. While Han tries and fails to talk them down, Rey ends up releasing Rathors that provide a distraction but almost take Finn until Rey uses a blaster on one in an obvious ripoff of the Rancor scene from Return of the Jedi. They hyperspace out and Rey, in another example of extremely plot-convenient skills, bypasses the compressor, showing more knowledge of the Millennium Falcon than Han Solo somehow. Get used to it, these extremely coincidental abilities of Rey have only just begun and it's prevalent throughout the entire movie and trilogy. Unlike Luke, who is exactly good at one thing, Rey seems to be magically perfect at everything she touches. Kylo meets up with Snoke, who is essentially the new Emperor and even appears in a hologram, granting him permission to use the Starkiller base to destroy the New Republic. The subject soon turns to Kylo's father, Han, with Kylo insisting Han means nothing to him, but obviously he's conflicted because father-son conflict. So basically, the Starkiller is a souped-up weapon that uses stars to destroy multiple planets simultaneously, you know, just a Death Star on steroids. Granted, Return of the Jedi also reused the Death Star concept, but the borrowed elements are starting to get a little saturated here. Kylo even has the burnt mask of Vader that he essentially turned into a shrine and talks to for strength. I guess Han and everyone else never told him that Vader turned to the light side because he believes that Vader will guide him to the dark side. Real shame Anakin's Force Ghost can't just appear to him and set the record straight, huh? In any event, the Starkiller destroys the New Republic in one single attack. I guess it's convenient that the New Republic's planets happen to be lined up like billiards, huh? The prequels, for all their faults, did a really good job of showing the Emperor's rise of power by raising his clone army and manipulating the Republic for his own ends. Here it's just whoosh, wiped out in one attack, because I guess we really need to get that silly plot development out of the way so we could rip off the original trilogy again. Han and Chewie speak with Maz while Finn tries to leave to the Outer Rim. Rey, of course, tries to get him to stay, but Finn admits he was a former stormtrooper and doesn't believe the First Order can be beaten. Rey's distracted by a screaming girl and wanders into the castle. She finds a chest and finds Anakin's lightsaber that somehow appeared here after falling in The Empire Strikes Back. She receives a lot of visions after touching it, including from her own past, and runs into Kanata. Kanata reveals that Rey is Force sensitive, but Rey refuses the lightsaber and runs off into the woods. The First Order attacks the castle, and Finn ends up with the lightsaber that Rey refused in order to join in the fight. However, he's confronted by F92199, best known as the
Raider!
guy. Fun fact, this guy was actually one of Finn's former comrades, and I actually felt sorry for the guy. One of his companions dies and the other one turns on him. Must be rough. He angrily uses a Buzz Baton type of weapon to fight Finn and manages to knock him down on the ground, but Han uses Chewie's bowcaster to save him. The three are then captured by the First Order, but Poe arrives to fight them off. Meanwhile, Rey encounters Kylo in the woods, but Kylo restrains her with a Force. He learns through mind probing that she's seen the map already and that he no longer needs BB-8, deciding to just capture her instead. While it looks like the Resistance is won, it's revealed that Rey is being abducted by Kylo as he makes his escape. Back at the Resistance base, C-3PO reveals that R2-D2 has been dormant and that the map is incomplete. Han and Leia are finally reunited and are aware that Kylo is their son. Finn gives them blueprints to the base, having been convinced to join in the fight, as the Starkiller base begins acquiring star juice to destroy Dakar. They learn that if they destroy the thermal oscillator, the base will implode. Better hit that weak spot before the weapon fires again. Now where does that sound familiar? Leia pleads with Han to save their son, and they're off for the Starkiller base. Meanwhile, Kylo begins interrogating Rey. However, despite literally learning that she had the Force not long ago and not having any training to speak of, Rey manages to reverse his mind probe and look into his mind. This is how some fans choose to justify her being so knowledgeable with the Force, even though it presents the equally vexing problem of how she managed to reverse a mind probe in the first place. I know I mentioned it during my Empire Strikes Back review, but I feel it deserves revisiting here that if people think that Luke was as OP and plot convenient as Rey, they better think again. Luke was only good at piloting. He was clearly shown to be bad with the Force until Return of the Jedi, but Rey here shows expert level knowledge on just about everything, outdoing people who are supposed to be well trained in it. She even interprets Chewie better than Han. Hey, J.J. Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy, I have nothing against you as people, but the decision to make Rey perfect at everything was a very bad one. This only makes her a poorly written character that nobody can relate to, and that is not a strong character. Alright, rant over now, moving on. Kylo leaves in frustration, and Rey manages to use a mind trick on the stormtrooper to let her out. Because sure, why not? Rey has done everything else without any training or effort. Granted, it initially fails, but this is a technique so advanced that only Obi-Wan was seen successfully doing it until Luke eventually is trained enough to be able to do it himself. Worth noting, however, is that the Stormtrooper's number has 007 on it and is played by Daniel Craig, a fact sadly overlooked by the aforementioned plot-convenient powers. Rey then moves to escape, and when Kylo realizes Rey escaped when he was going to take her to Snoke, he has another temper tantrum. And people thought the prequel Anakin was emo, at least he didn't go around randomly slashing at things when he didn't get his way. He just whined about sand. Getting into the base, Han, Chewie, and Finn manage to capture Phasma. Seems a little cheap to have them just sneak up on her, but sure, she's pretty much Boba Fett where she's designed to look cool but never actually does much. In any case, they force her to disable the shields at gunpoint because I guess the First Order superiors are all cowards and they shove her down a garbage chute. After reuniting with Rey, the group plants thermal detonators around the base to create an opening. Kylo then confronts Han, and while Han tries to talk Kylo down and beat Ben again, Kylo is too conflicted and proceeds to fatally stab his own father. In a fit of rage, Chewie wounds Kylo with his bowcaster and the group gets out with a now injured Kylo in pursuit. He then knocks Rey out by force pushing her into a tree. This is when Finn shows what is, in my opinion, the best bit of character development in the entire movie as he takes up lightsaber and fights Kylo. If I'm being honest here, Finn is my favorite of the new characters, especially in this movie, even if he is a little underutilized. He goes from a shell-shocked stormtrooper who wants to desert to taking on Kylo Ren, who is this series' Darth Vader. While he's an injured, emo, weak Vader, that's still gutsy for someone who doesn't even have Force powers to our knowledge. After slashing Finn in the back, Kylo has to fight an awakened Rey who uses the Force to take Anakin's lightsaber. Now obviously Rey's at a disadvantage in the ensuing fight because Kylo's trained with Luke and Snoke. Despite the injury, it's an uphill battle and Rey barely escapes with her life. Just kidding! Rey proceeds to curb stomp Kylo and knock him down, essentially defeating the big dragon bad in the very first movie. Chewie proceeds to detonate the thermal detonators in the base, causing it to begin imploding and a chasm to form with Rey and Finn on one side and Kylo on the other. Okay, maybe I'm being a bit too harsh because Rey does initially start to lose until she gains the upper hand, but the fact that she gains the upper hand at all in Best Sim is ridiculous, considering this is the first movie and she has literally no Force training. This is a fact I will continue to emphasize, because it makes her look like a poorly written fanfiction character rather than a legitimate, empowered character written by a multi-billion-dollar corporation that people can relate to. R2-D2 awakens and has the missing piece of the map, with BB-8 holding the other piece, and they reveal Luke's location, so he and Rey have this awkward staring contest, and the movie's over. My final verdict on The Force Awakens? It's okay. I'll admit the hype was very real when it first came out, because Star Wars hadn't seen the light of day in decades, and people just assumed a follow-up was never going to happen. Of course, I don't think a follow-up to the Skywalker Saga really needed to happen. That's what annoys me the most about this movie, aside from Rey just being plot perfect at everything. Return of the Jedi was meant to be the end of the Skywalker tale. This was meant to envelop us in a new cast, but they failed to do that for the most part. Finn was the one character that got enough attention and character development for me to like, and I'd say his character was still very underutilized. He doesn't even act like a stormtrooper once he's freed. You'd think his brainwashing would at least make him more by the books and procedurally, but nope, he just becomes largely a joke character, and I think that's a damn shame. Well, at least he got a crowning moment against Kylo, even if he didn't actually win the fight. Ultimately, The Force Awakens is a pretty good movie, but it's too much a retreading on A New Hope, and the different elements are almost exclusively to its detriment. Still, you can do a lot worse, which leads us to... Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi! Better pack in, because this is where things truly take a turn for the dark side, the worse. For all its faults, The Force Awakens set things up in an interesting way. Rey's origins are still a mystery, Kylo was supposed to complete his training with Snoke, and we finally found Luke. With the right writer, this could have been a glorious return to form for Star Wars. Instead, well, let's just go through it step by step. It starts out immediately after The Force Awakens with the successful destruction of the non-Death Star, with the non-rebels evacuating to flee the non-Empire. Right off the bat, it starts out with a seriously stupid joke as Poe distracts General Hux with basically a crank call where he starts pretending he can't hear him and then tops it out with a yo mama joke. Stay classy, folks. What happens next is possibly the one genuinely good scene in the movie, in my opinion. Poe proceeds to rush the Dreadnought, taking out its defense cannons. I'm not gonna lie, it really had that classic Star Wars dogfight charm. During this, the targeting system actually goes out of whack and BB-8 takes it upon itself to try to fix it, eventually just jamming its head into the circuit to complete it. Now, unlike the Yo Mama joke, this is a joke that actually got a chuckle out of me because it reminds me of all those classic moments someone hits an engine with a wrench or something and it works. So I can sort of imagine R2-D2 doing this. Unfortunately, things quickly take a downward spiral as, for some reason, tons of the Resistance ignores Leia's direct order in favor of Poe. A lot of Resistance bombers show up, and can I take a minute to talk about how poorly designed these bombers are? They're massive ships that move slowly, are massive targets, and have no shields or personal defenses of any kind. I don't care how nostalgic you are for World War II, Johnson, this is suicidally dumb in the Star Wars universe. Those bombers may as well be saying, shoot me, for the love of God, shoot me! As predicted, TIE fighters lay waste to most of the bombers, even killing Rose's sister in the process. If you're wondering who Rose is, trust me, we'll get to it. They managed to destroy the Dreadnought, but with heavy losses, and hyperspace the hell out of there once it's done. Snoke appears through hologram, and somehow Force slams Hux through the hologram, although Hux appeases him by insisting the Resistance can't stay out of their grip for long due to a trick up their sleeve. Finn finally wakes up, and it's the start of his downfall as the movie makes a complete joke out of him, having him walk around in essentially a diaper. I know that Luke was sort of in one in The Empire Strikes Back, but at least he was fully dressed when he came to. Poe tells him that Rey already left to find Luke, and Finn decides to take it upon himself to set out for her. Meanwhile, Leia slaps Poe and demotes him to captain for disobeying orders. First off, that slap is unnecessary, and second, the fleet kinda all disobeyed her orders, but I guess only Poe's alive to face the punishment for it, so sure. Unfortunately, the First Order just happened to conveniently install their hyperspace tracker, so they give chase in what is possibly the slowest and most boring chase in all of Star Wars. Meanwhile, Snoke meets up with Kylo. I guess all that talk of completing his training was BS, as he now berates Kylo harshly for losing to Rey and orders him to remove his helmet, calling it ridiculous. After an argument in which Snoke blasts Kylo with Force lightning and calls him a child in a mask, Kylo proves him wrong by throwing a temper tantrum and throwing the mask against the wall. Enraged by the whole thing, Kylo takes his personal TIE fighter to attack the fleet himself. Leia gives Poe permission to counter, but Kylo makes it to the fighter and destroys her X-Wings before they even have a chance. He almost shoots at the bridge, but he senses Leia and relents. Too bad he didn't do that for Han, but sure. Fortunately, his helpful assistant does it for him. Everyone is killed on the bridge, including Admiral Akbar, who doesn't even get the courtesy of dying on screen. Alright, there's some motivation for Kylo's character, his mother being killed against his will. But wait, what's this? Are Leia's eyes beginning to open? Realizing that she has plot immunity, Leia proceeds to Superman her way to the airlock. No, I'm dead serious, this actually happens, and yes, it's incredibly stupid. Not only has Leia never stated to have Force training, in fact she explicitly rejected the Jedi path to join the New Republic, but she should have been knocked unconscious just by the shock of the explosion. The fact that she was able to survive the vacuum of space and find the strength to bring herself to safety is a whole new level of plot convenience. With Leia now passed out and the others killed off screen, talk about a poor send-off for Akbar, in comes Admiral Holdo. She's a purple-haired diva that nobody's ever seen before, although is apparently a great figure, so just take our word for it. She immediately demonstrates the discipline and respect of an admiral by spitting in Poe's eye and refusing to say that they have any kind of plan. You know, when I see this character, I think of Captain Janeway from Star Trek Voyager. I remember what a respectable female leader looks like, one that actually acts like she's meant to be there. Meanwhile, Finn's character development from the previous movie is completely destroyed as he intends to desert and warn Rey but is stopped by Rose. And we come to the second time that someone jumped to the wrong conclusions about Finn and proceeded to physically assault him. After convincing her to play along, they and Finn plot to work behind Holdo's back. I guess even Rose realized that Holdo is a crap leader. Meanwhile, back to Rey, who had just met Luke and was offering him Anakin's old lightsaber.
As Luke takes it in his hands, you can truly feel the weight and responsibility of such a legendary saber.
All of 2 seconds before he tosses it behind his shoulder.
Honestly, the meme writes itself. Luke then proceeds to refuse to train Rey. I get you, because of her impatience or other shortcomings like with Yoda, right? Nope, just because he didn't feel like it. That's right, the great Jedi Master is now a sulking crybaby. I'm sensing a theme going on here. We don't even get to see Luke react to his old friend Han's death. He just asks about Han and then it cuts out. Luke is eventually guilted by Chewie and R2-D2 into training Rey and tries to tell her to reject her simplistic view of the Force as being a light and dark side, which I kinda think is stupid. While I do believe that the Jedi Council were way too rigid and that certain things like Force lightning can be used for good, this whole moral gray thing in Star Wars goes against the core foundations of the entire series. But you know, subversion! Did we really need to see Luke milking an alien for green milk? Nope, but it's a subversion! While this is going on, Rey and Kylo have what can be best described as Force Skype conversations with them even being able to see each other. After Rey travels to a cavern where the dark side is powerful, totally not ripping off Empire Strikes Back, and asks a reflective rock wall to see her parents, she just sees herself over and over again. Through Force Skyping, Rey learns Kylo's side of the story and that Luke actually tried to kill Kylo when he was Ben. Rey proceeds to overpower Luke, because of course she does. Luke is no match for the power of Mary Sue after all, and he explains that he stopped himself short and Ben misinterpreted it. Yeah, that doesn't make it better. Just the fact that he thought about killing his nephew for having some bad in him destroys Luke as a character. This is the same Luke that risked everything and everyone to save his father, and we're supposed to believe he got a little nervous about his own nephew and contemplated murdering him. Did Leia and Han know about this? Because this is seriously screwed up. Luke's training just turns into him ranting about the Jedi and about how bad they are because subversion! Rey decides to leave without Luke because Luke's still being a sulking crybaby, but eventually is stopped by the Force Ghost of Yoda before he can destroy the Jedi texts. Force Ghost Yoda then proceeds to use Force Lightning to destroy the library himself, eliminating the point of stopping him in the first place. Because I guess Force Ghosts were always able to do that, and I guess Obi-Wan and Yoda were just too lazy to stop the Emperor and Vader. Also, they decided to make Yoda act like a crazy old man like he was in the beginning of Empire Strikes Back, suggesting Ryan doesn't actually understand Yoda's character and just wanted to use nostalgia for Yoda's old man routine. You pitiful mortals actually thought that Yoda was only putting on an act and that he's actually a very serious Jedi Master? Subversion! Meanwhile, Finn and Rose, along with BB-8, head to a casino to find a code cracker. Finn is mesmerized by the casino, but never taking a chance to inject some politics into a Star Wars movie, Rose said that it's built on exploitation. It's kind of weird having anti-business sentiments in a movie that is published by Disney. Subversion! They find the code breaker but are busted by the cops for illegally parking. It's all good though because they happen to find another code breaker in prison. Golly, how plot convenient is that they happen to find another code breaker in the exact same cell? Subversion! Escaping from prison, there's a subplot about them freeing the animals from the stables, but I cared so little that I skipped over it. The best part is that they just keep the slave children there. They just bypass them in favor of freeing the animals. You thought they were actually going to prioritize the people. Subversion! They take off with the codebreaker also, with him taking Rose's gold pendant as payment and making a stupid philosophy that the good guys and bad guys really aren't so different. Yeah, one is only trying to slaughter countless innocent people, that's all. In any case, they infiltrate the First Order, but of course the codebreaker betrays them and they're captured. You were expecting a Han Solo kind of hard-ass who ends up being a good guy. Subversion! Captain Phasma is the one to greet Finn and intends to execute them with electrical space axes. Meanwhile, Poe is of course still being snubbed by the child of command Holdo and still not being told what's going on, so he organizes a coup. With the way she was treating them, she was honestly begging for a revolt if you ask me. Meanwhile, Rey's taken to Kylo to see Snoke. In what is the first time ever that Rey has ever been outmatched, Snoke force pulls her lightsaber and whacks her on the head with it. Yep, there's more childish humor here because... Subversion! Snoke closes his eyes and says some very vague and very tempting words about how Kylo will strike down his true enemy. Of course, Kylo proceeds to kill Snoke by slicing him in half. But there's one movie left. Surely they wouldn't kill off their big bad. Subversion! The guards attack Rey and Kylo and a fight ensues in what is perhaps the worst choreography in Star Wars history. A guard has to awkwardly move his weapon to avoid hitting Rey, and another guard's weapon just flat out disappears. Obi-Wan versus Vader may have been very aged and stiff, but at least it wasn't very sloppy. After that all mess is out of the way, Kylo offers Rey to join the Kylo Force, but of course she refuses because she a good girl. Meanwhile, Leia awakens and breaks up the mutiny by blasting Poe unconscious. It's revealed that Holdo was actually holdoing out on her actual plans. The plan was to evacuate and use the main fighter as a distraction. I guess the First Order doesn't have the life-detecting technology the Empire had over 30 years ago. Whatever, it fails anyway because of the betrayer codebreaker, because the men in this movie have to be stupid, incompetent, or both. Many escape vessels are shot down, and Holdo gets the bright idea to turn around the main fighter and light force skip through the Force Order's ships. Because that's a thing now. This shakes up everything, and Phasma's execution is disrupted. However, a fight between Phasma and Finn ensues. In the process, Finn ends up hitting her with a shock baton, breaking part of her mask. Finn then proceeds to call her out on cowardly lowering Starkiller's shields under the barrel of a gun. Phasma dismisses it, but then shoots all of her troops as Finn rushes her and cuts her hand off. She then comes after Finn, but he blasts her with a big gun. Sounds awesome, right? Subversion! It was actually a deleted scene, and Phasma actually falls via a platform. You know, this really isn't helping the theory that the men are just snuffed in this movie. Finn's real victory is a deleted scene, and instead she just falls to her supposed death. They all make it a crate that's totally not Hoth because look, it's salt instead of snow. Subversion! The Resistance group re-meet at an abandoned rebel base / mine as TIE fighters are in pursuit. Finding ski speeders, they fight against the First Order's assault forces and a super laser meant to cut through the main door. With his character arc over and Phasma finally defeated, Finn intends to sacrifice himself by launching himself into the super laser, bravely ending his life for the sake of his new friends. Subversion! Rose just crashes into him, and I swear to you what happens next is by far the cringiest moment in the entire series. Jar Jar Binks ain't got crap on this, folks. Finn questions why she did it, and she proceeds to give him some stupid crap about how they don't win by fighting those they hate, but by saving those they love. Even though she just stopped Finn from sacrificing himself to save those he loved, and there's an explosion behind them just to showcase that the rebellion is now screwed thanks to Rose. Hell, just crashing into them could have killed them both. Thankfully, Luke finally shows up. He comforts Leia and gives her a pair of dice, because we need a hook for Solo to show you why this never-before-seen dice is suddenly the most important thing ever. Luke arrives on the battlefield, and Kylo, being the emo child he is, immediately orders all their forces to fire on him. I'll admit what happens next seems pretty badass, as Luke is completely unscratched by the attack and just dusts himself off, so Kylo personally engages him. While Luke seems to be remorseful for failing Kylo, he still chooses to berate him in this moment. Luke stops resisting, seemingly about to Obi-Wan Kenobi himself when... Subversion! Kylo's lightsaber actually goes through him because he was force projecting himself. Alright, this seems like a pretty cool idea at first. I'm actually just fine with this, Luke using an astral projection to stall out and be pragmatic, and with this pragmatism he manages to avoid Obi-Wan's unfortunate fate. Well done, Rian Johnson, this is a subversion I can actually live with. But wait, there's more! This is actually a double! Subversion! Luke proceeds to die, making the astral projection 100% completely worthless. If you were gonna make him die anyway, you should have had him show up in person. If you wanted to do a force projection, why not do an actual subversion and have him live? By using a projection and have him die anyway, all Johnson succeeded in doing is making Luke die a coward. The Resistance does get out of the cave thanks to some crystal foxes, and thanks to Racer Christ pushing a lot of massive rocks out of the way and helping them get out. To say she got force training would be laughable. Luke really didn't teach her a damn thing unless he did it off screen. In any case, they escape and there's a glint of hope as a child slave is seen using the force to retrieve a broom. And with that, it's the end of Star Wars The Last Jedi. What is my verdict, you may ask? Strap in, this is gonna get ugly. It's by far the worst in the series. While it had the good element of Poe shooting down the Dreadnought's cannons, one good scene cannot save the rest of this crap. It seems so cynical and detached even from Force Awakens, let alone the first 6 movies. The males act completely out of character, seemingly for no reason other than to inflate the female characters. I love strong female characters as much as the next guy, and characters like Ahsoka Tano from the Clone Wars cartoon and Care from the new Mandalorian series really speak to me, but this is not the way to do it. It even contradicts the very previous movie because Luke left a map for people to find him and he didn't want to be found, and now Poe and Finn suddenly had their character developments reverted. Holdo and Rose were horrible new characters, as much as the Codebreaker, honestly. Honestly, Kelly Marie Tran, I think you were done dirty by this. Finn was my favorite in The Force Awakens, but he turned into a joke side character in The Last Jedi, his one victory in a deleted scene. I have very little good things to say about this movie. It's the worst of the bunch and a complete disgrace to George Lucas's creation, in my humble opinion. Even Disney is finally admitting it's a bad movie, completely threw it under the bus in an attempt to salvage the finale, which is Star Wars Episode 9, Rise of Skywalker! Oh boy, here it is, the new finale of the Skywalker Saga. I still can't believe I'm saying that, and honestly in my mind it ended in Return of the Jedi. It takes place immediately after The Last Jedi, where Kylo is for some reason looking for an artifact and is called by the Emperor's voice. That's right, old Palpatine's back. If you're wondering how he survived being thrown down a shaft and into the core, don't worry, the movie hopes you'll forget all about that because it's never brought up. Oh, and Snoke was just one of many clones that Palpatine's made. Why he didn't just clone himself, I'll never know. Maybe those were failed cloning attempts. I also gotta love Palpatine's black lipstick and zombie eyes. Kylo is still being an emo child, questioning Palpatine and even suggesting he could kill him. Palpatine begins to work his charm and manages to talk him over by offering him the Empire in exchange for doing as he's asked. He shows off a crap ton of Star Destroyers as he calls his movement the Final Order. Real creative. You may as well just call it Order 67. Back on the Falcon, Finn and Poe are playing Chewie in a game of Dejerick and just assume he's cheating. Remember the first rule of playing with Chewie, always just let him win. It seems there's a spy on the First Order who feeds information to R2-D2, but they have to get the hell out of there because they're spotted. On the way out, Finn guns down TIE fighters, which I'll admit is a pretty cool little moment. What happens next definitively proves that they're trying to distance themselves from The Last Jedi because Poe's using lightspeed skips to go between locations, seemingly even phasing through objects. Meanwhile, Rey is in a forest sitting crisscross floating in the air and trying to contact previous Jedi voices because I guess she's the Avatar now. For once, she doesn't immediately get everything she wants and it fails, but Leia motivates her. I find it very jarring that Leia, who chose against Jedi training in favor of being part of the Senate, would be a very serious Jedi Master, but sure, I guess we have to make it out like Leia was the prodigy and just screw Luke. Alright, maybe I'm being a little salty, but it seems like Luke is just straight up tossed to the wind in these new films. Ranting aside, Rey is trained in an obstacle course, including literally the exact same droid Luke trained with under Obi-Wan. She wildly slashes to try to get the droid, taking out a staff and just crushing it, but felling a tree that lands on BB-8 in the process. Alright, I'll buy that. At least she has a good reason to be good with the staff. One re-obsession with Vader's mask later, Poe and Rey argued like an old married couple, with Rey complaining about the damaged state of the Falcon and Poe complaining about the damaged state of BB-8. You can tell that they had to resort to old footage due to Carrie Fisher's passing because her responses are very vague answers that they had archived. Still, it wasn't too jarring, I suppose. Rey actually claims that it should have been impossible for them to light speed skip because of the compressor, once again showing that she's now an expert on freaking everything just because she used to scavenge. Poe and Finn, of course, call Rey the best, just to affirm that the universe centers around her. It's like they were trying to please both sides, because they humbled her a bit in the training, but now she's suddenly the best again, and that's quickly forgotten. The Resistance is briefed on Palpatine's return with what looks like Akbar's son suggesting it might be cloning. I'd like to think this means that Disney is actually acknowledging the extended universe again, but no, that just means they'll happily steal from it whenever they can't come up with their own ideas. You know, when they run out of original trilogy things to rip off. Kylo regains his Vader complex and has his mask repaired before talking with his group about a spy among them. One of the generals argues with him, reminiscent of the Vader Force choke scene, only emo Kylo is far less subtle and flat out slams him into the ceiling. As the main group hunts down the Sith artifact that always existed for some reason, they reach a planet where there's a festival going on. To their credit, they finally acknowledge C-3PO's translating abilities again as he translates for the aliens. Given that Rey was capable of translating for BB-8 and Chewie almost immediately, I'm surprised they didn't just have her do it. Yes, I'm still salty about that, thank you very much. Kylo and Rey have another Skype Force chat. Kylo wants her on his side, blah blah blah. What happens next is probably the most astronomically stupid use of the Force though, because he actually grabs her beads through the Force connection. I'm sorry, what? So what are ships for in this universe, and why doesn't he just grab Rey in one move so much stupid? He finds her location by having the beads examined, and stormtroopers soon appear, but a guy in armor shoots the troopers down and has them follow him. He then reveals himself as Lando, which I'll admit is a pretty cool way to introduce him back into the series. After Poe hacks a speeder vehicle, a pretty cool way to show that there's more on the team than just Rey, they take off. And this is where the stupid "they fly now" moment happens. Oh yes, Finn, because it's not like stormtroopers have ever flown in the Star Wars universe before. For Rey's sake, Boba Fett had a jetpack in the original trilogy. Even discounting the extended universe, how do you think they wouldn't have that tech after 30 years? I don't care if it was a joke, it was still a stupid one. After Rey quotes Leia about never underestimating a droid, Finn smoothly takes out a stormtrooper by having rope on him and they slam into the canyon wall. I'll admit, it already has a lot more good moments than The Last Jedi. They end up being taken out by one of the flying stormtroopers before falling into what looks like quicksand, but it's made out of metallic pellets, because sure, why not? Finn wants to tell Rey something but decides not to, and it's never actually brought up again. I think he was supposed to confess his love, but sure, whatever. There are certain markets that Disney really doesn't want to get on the bad side of. They're dropped into a cave, Indiana Jones style, and Rey uses her lightsaber as a flashlight, with Finn using an actual flashlight. By a stroke of pure luck of plot convenience, they find the dagger that Luke was searching for 30 years, as well as the bones of a previous guy. C-3PO somehow knows it has the Wayfinder inscribed on it, but can't translate it due to it being a Sith language and his programming is forbidden to translate it. Okay, what? Who programmed that? The Sith? You'd think the good guys would want to have Sith language translated, you know, to receive transmissions? Well, C-3PO was made by Anakin, so maybe he put that programming in him later or something. A sandworm appears and seems to be hostile, but Rey notices a wound and heals it. This is similar to Baby Yoda from The Mandalorian, except Baby Yoda was actually shown attempting it before it worked. How would Rey know to do it? I'm gonna assume Leia or Luke taught it to her, but I suspect plot convenience. Poe mentions that the First Order will be waiting for them at the Falcon, joking that they'd use C-3PO as a target droid. Well, at least the humor is far less cringe, no mama jokes in here, thank Rey. Poe starts firing up an abandoned ship they found with cobwebs everywhere. They find a conehead droid that BB-8 repairs and apparently can talk. Rey wandered off, so Chewie is sent to find her, but Imperial spotted Chewie and grab him, taking the dagger. Then comes the trailer moment as Rey takes out her lightsaber and a ship is coming at her, but she does a flip and slices off one of the engines. Because sure, why not? With all the things we had Rey do so far, I'm guessing that's believable. In any case, it turns out to be Kylo's ship. Rey is made aware that Chewie was taken prisoner and actually starts pulling down the ship that was taking him by force. Okay, I know Yoda may have said size doesn't matter, but Rey was prior struggling to deal with the obstacle course training. Now all of a sudden she's at his level? In any case, Kylo pushes against her to try to make the ship take off, and it's a tug of war. The struggle is brought to an end as Rey actually does something wrong and accidentally invokes Force Lightning, destroying the ship. I'll admit, this is actually more believable. She clearly did it by accident and is horrified by what happened. If there's ever a justifiable use of the Force by her, this is it. If it was one of the previous two movies, she'd probably just instantly know it and use it as intended, so this is an improvement. They end up fleeing, with Finn insisting that it wasn't Rey's fault because nothing is ever her fault, and Rey admits that she had a vision seeing herself and Kylo on the throne. Is that Rey struggling with the dark side I see? I would complain that this is a ripoff of previous movies, but I'm just happy to see that Rey is actually having shortcomings for once. Only a shame that you're 2 movies too late on that one. Somehow Chewie's still alive, probably a reshoot because the leaks said Chewie was killed off for real and is imprisoned. C-3PO has the memory of the dagger, but can't even retrieve it due to his backwards-ass programming, so Poe has the idea to send them into a black market blacksmith to C-3PO's objection. On the way is apparently Poe's bitter ex, who looks like a female Boba Fett. She threatens them, but Jesus Christ proceeds to deliver divine justice upon her, and they're taken to the blacksmith. As it turns out, reprogramming C-3PO will wipe out his memory, so in comes the trailer moment saying he's taking one last look at his friends that he barely even knows. I'll give them credit though, it's a nice use of C-3PO who is normally criminally underused in these movies. Once it's done, his eyes turn red, he translates the coordinates being on the moon of Endor, because of course they are, and then proceeds to just introduce himself as C-3PO, human-cyborg relations. In the meantime, Poe and his ex are bickering like an old married couple. People seem to love doing that in this movie. Kylo's men locate Rey's location and ask if they should destroy the city, but Kylo as usual just gives them an angry glare. Poe's ex reveals her eyes through the mask and offers Poe to come with her, but Poe of course has to stay until the war's over. And that's good on the movie for treating Poe like he's actually a decent character, another point that it has over The Last Jedi. The conehead droid talks about a squeaky wheel that Rey helps for him, and I gotta admit that's pretty believable. Her being a scavenger, I could see her knowing how to oil up a squeaky wheel. What happens next is really funny to the people who insist Star Wars is for children because Poe tells C-3PO to move his, and I quote, metal ass. C-3PO is now officially Bender and you all can bite his glorious golden ass. Poe offers X to come with him is turned down, wants a kiss but is just shoved and told to go. Poor Poe. They infiltrate the Star Destroyer and Rey of course Jedi mind tricks 2 stormtroopers. If this was the first time she'd ever done it, I'd be okay with it because Luke does it in Return of the Jedi, but she's always had this power from the moment she started using the Force, so it just reminds me of that and annoys me. They infiltrate the ship, blasting cameras and the like, and a higher-up question 2 ship is in the hangar, and Poe and Finn gun down stormtroopers. I never understood why Finn never feels any remorse for gunning down his former comrades who were brainwashed like he was, otherwise he might actually have to consider the consequences of his actions. Poe's shot in the arm and they're surrounded, brought in to be executed. However, Hux shoots the execution troopers and reveals that he's the Mole. Of course, he's only in it to see Kylo lose. Meanwhile, Rey picks up the dagger in Kylo's quarters and hears voices, also seeing the memorial to Vader. That must be really awkward, seeing someone's sad little shrine. Kylo has another forced Skype call. Somehow they fight in it and manage to smash things, and he's deduced that she's now in his quarters. At this point, I honestly couldn't care less, because screw convenient force Skype physical contact. Kylo mentions his parents deserted her to protect her, another retcon of The Last Jedi where he said they just sold her off for drinking money. Rey shows up and easily blasts stormtroopers with Chewie's bow, and you will not question it because she is the great Racer's Christ, dammit. Hux asks Finn to blast him in the arm so it looked like he was overpowered, but Finn decides to be a jerk and shoot him in the leg instead. Sure thing, Finn. Kylo and Rey have a standoff, and Kylo reveals that Rey is Palpatine's granddaughter and that he wants the two of them to kill Palpatine and take over the throne. I knew he had a Vader complex, but I didn't know it was that bad. Rey, of course, refuses, and the others come in via ship, blowing away troopers with a jet engine, and Rey force jumps into it. Hux tries to claim he was overpowered as he planned, but Pride doesn't fall for it and just shoots him down. On to Endor's moons again, but at least this time it's the ocean moon of Kef Bir. Honestly, it's probably the most creative thing that JJ's done in this entire movie. Finn meets up with a black woman named Jenna after the dagger leads him forward, who, as it turns out, is another former stormtrooper just like Finn. JJ must be playing fourth-dimensional chess right now because it seems like he's ripping off his own writing now. Their company was told to fire on civilians, but they refused. Hey, Doom called they want their edgy backstory back. Rey takes off on boat. Poe and Finn, of course, marry like an old married couple, with Finn taking the moment to remind the audience that Leia is now the best thing ever, while Rey parkours up the rubble of the old Death Star, which reminds me a bit of Jedi Fallen Order. How the old Death Star managed to remain so intact is anyone's guess, but she finds a pyramid artifact only to be confronted with a vision of herself in a black hood holding Darth Maul's lightsaber. I'd also like to point out that giving her a Darth Maul lightsaber would have made a lot more sense because it's closer to a staff and would have made her more unique. Just saying, JJ. She loses the artifact during this and it ends up in Kylo's hands, who once again tries to get her to join the dark side. Rey basically has a freakout and starts wildly slashing at Kylo throughout the entire fight, similar to Luke angrily slashing at Darth Vader, but it isn't really treated as a bad thing until the very end of the fight. Kylo has Rey on the ground surprisingly, but is distracted by a connection with Leia, and Rey freaking stabs him when he wasn't even fighting anymore. It's all good though, because Rey has force healing now, so she doesn't have to face the consequences of her own actions. Rey takes Kylo's ship and hightails it, leaving the others behind to fly off. Han appears before Kylo, probably a hallucination because he ain't no Force ghost, but of course the conversation has to turn to Leia again. At least Han acts more like how he should act instead of a deadbeat dad. Ben is finally convinced and throws his lightsaber, which seems pretty stupid because he could have been using it to fight the Emperor with. Also, did I mention that each Star Destroyer is equipped with a Death Star cannon? Yep, all 100 of them. Talk about a real jump the shark moment, it's like they're not even trying anymore. On the plus side, Leia made Poe acting general and he makes Finn general as his first act. Also, apparently the Conehead droid's named Dio. Did you seriously just make a JoJo reference, J.J. Abrams? Better be careful, because if you keep doing things like that, I might actually get to like you. Rey ends up destroying Kylo's ship and exiles herself on the same planet that Luke was on, because sure, I guess at least now she's following in Luke's footsteps. However, as she throws the lightsaber into the fire, Force Ghost Luke grabs it. Because Force Ghosts can interact with the world of the living completely now. I'll admit, though, it was pretty funny how they basically contradict The Last Jedi because Luke scolds her on throwing away a lightsaber. Luke pep talks her, admitting he was wrong, and then the conversation turns to Leia again and about what she would have done. Because Luke and Han don't matter, it's all about the Leia. Imagine if it was reversed and a male Senate character kept looking up to Luke instead of Leia because same gender. Honestly, that's how it feels here. In any case, Luke Force ghosts up his old X-Wing, because of course he can, after showing her Leia's old lightsaber that she totally always had and wasn't made up for this exact movie. Luke says fear kept him on the planet, even though, again, he left a map for them to find him. I guess JJ wasn't quite ready to retcon all of The Last Jedi's stupider aspects, but okay, it's not like Luke is acting like a crotchety old grandpa this time, so take what you can get. It shows a flashback where young Leia beats Luke easily in a sparring match, because of course she does. For the sake of my sanity, I'm just going to assume that Luke was going easy on her and she surprised him. In any case, Rey heads to Palpatine while the rest of them concentrate their efforts on the fleet. And this is where it starts to feel like Star Wars again. Poe and Finn discuss a plan with the rest of the fleet to take out the communications tower. However, when they get there, they find out the communications are now coming from the command ship, one of the Star Destroyers. Dead space horses, do! Meanwhile, Rey makes it to Palpatine's lair and finds it empty, with Palpatine appearing behind her and saying that he waited for his grandchild for a long time. He apparently wants her to take over the throne because of course he does. He only wanted Luke to be his apprentice, but apparently Rey is already so great that he wants her to take over for his exact position. Praise be thy Rey! Palpatine points out that their friends have no hope of winning in an attempt to anger her, which is definitely not a rip-off of Return of the Jedi. She still refuses, and using their Force Skype connection, gives Kylo her lightsaber, who came running in and was fighting the Knights of Ren. Somehow she also appeared with him and is also fighting them off, because I guess the Force connection also allows her to teleport. Palpatine then, and I kid you not, uses their bond and drains it to regain his former glory. Who knew that all you needed was the power of love to make yourself younger again? Meanwhile, as Poe and friends appear to be losing, Lando reveals that his call went through. I actually think this is the best part of the movie, as a crap ton of regular civilian ships appear and join in the fight. They completely overwhelm the commanding Star Destroyer and take it out, and Finn and Jenna are saved by Lando and the Falcon. Palpatine then shows off by force lightning into the air, beginning to devastate the fleet. Kylo gets up, but Palpatine easily force pushes her back. Rey then hears former Jedi Masters, and what a missed opportunity it was to actually show them, but she gets up and force pulls her lightsaber back to her. What happens next is just ridiculously stupid in my opinion. Palpatine declares, "I am all the Sith!" And Rey grabs the other lightsaber and says, "And I am all the Jedi." With both lightsabers, she single-handedly redirects Palpatine's lightning and completely destroys him. Screw you, Anakin, your sacrifice and all that, because Rey's the real hero here and you'd best step down, you man. After that, Rey collapses dead for no reason, probably dying for our sins or something. This was just so Kylo could heal her, kiss her, and then die himself. Gotta let the guy die after all, not Rey. The gang rejoice, the Ewoks take notice, and the Skywalker Saga is finally over. Again. Rey ends up gutting Leia and Luke's lightsaber to make her own, and even takes their last name. Move over, Luke and Leia. Rey is the real hero of the series. Conveniently and arbitrarily. Ultimately, what infuriates me the most about this movie is that it retconned the perfectly fine Return of the Jedi in order to pump up Rey, even belittling Anakin and Luke's struggles because Palpatine's back like nothing ever happened. Not only was it never even foreshadowed, but it wasn't even in the original script of this movie. JJ used Palpatine to cover for Johnson's blunders. I'll give this movie a little credit. It treats the characters with a great deal more respect, and it has a lot more good moments than The Last Jedi ever did. The series really had nowhere to go but up after that train wreck, and JJ at least made the finale feel more like Star Wars. It's just a real shame that he did so with the worst fanfiction character ever, Rey, and just lazily bringing back Palpatine and recycling so much of the old Star Wars. The Skywalker Saga already ended on a high note with the Return of the Jedi. This new trilogy should have been the beginning of a new saga. I think it's safe to say that Kathleen Kennedy and possibly Bob Iger are to blame for all this. Taken as a whole, the sequel trilogy is honestly pretty bad. The Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker had some good elements to it, and The Force Awakens at least sets itself up to have a great successor if it had a genuinely good director, but it's just wasted potential. It falls ridiculously short of the original trilogy, and I'd argue mostly falls short of the prequel trilogy. Going from worst to best, The Last Jedi comes in dead last. About the only good thing I have to say about it is that Poe's ship scene at the beginning was pretty cool. From the impracticality of the bombers to just destroying several characters in the ridiculous side quest, it's a slog to get through. The Rise of Skywalker is next, and while it is somewhat better and has more scenes I enjoyed, it's ultimately clunky and all over the place. Retconning Anakin and Luke's struggles just to give Rey another victory is very irritating to me. Next up is the Phantom Menace, the weakest of the prequels certainly, but it still has a charm to it and some good scenes like the fight in the beginning and even Anakin's pod race. And of course, who can deny that the Darth Maul fight is badass? Coming up next is The Force Awakens. It still has the problems with Rey and largely ripping off A New Hope, but there's also a lot more to like in this one compared to the other two. You ask me, the real highlights for me are when Finn and Poe are escaping and when that traitor stormtrooper was fighting Finn. It also had the potential to set itself up for a great sequel, even if it didn't actually come to pass. Coming in at number 5 is Attack of the Clones. While it had some very awkward romance scenes, the action tended to be very good. Jango's fight with Obi-Wan, Yoda fighting Dooku, and especially the clone troops showing up and kicking ass are all A+ to me. It also did a really good job setting things into motion for both Palpatine and Anakin. Number 4 is ironically also Episode 4, A New Hope. While it hasn't aged quite as gracefully as movies that would come after, it's still got a great atmosphere to return to and a stellar kickstart for the series. Coming up next is Return of the Jedi, a great if flawed finale to the original trilogy. Ewoks might not be the best thing ever, even if I personally like them, and the Death Star reconstruction was partially treading on old ground, but the Jabba rescue introduction of the Emperor and the dynamic between Vader and Luke really escalated it for me. Coming up to second best is Revenge of the Sith. While Anakin is still a little whiny and midichlorians always annoy me, it doesn't stop this movie from being a very compelling finale to the prequel trilogy. We see Palpatine really show off his evil side, the fight with Grievous was pretty gripping, and you could really feel Obi-Wan's pain for Anakin, and Order 66 still stands as the most morbid moment in the entire series. And of course, number 1 is The Empire Strikes Back. That was probably a pretty obvious choice, but that's because it's so good. Yoda was absolutely perfect as a mentor, it really showcased Luke's weaknesses after the first movie painted him as more of an idealist, and of course one of the best plot twists in cinema history cannot be overstated. And that was after Luke got his ass handed to him on a silver platter by Vader, which did a really good job showcasing just how skilled and menacing Vader really is. He really did everything right that the second movie in a trilogy should. It really showcased the Empire's menacing side and left us with a great cliffhanger that would have anyone chomping at the bits to see Return of the Jedi soon after. And that is my review of all 9 main Star Wars movies. Sadly, Bob Iger has said that Star Wars going forward will completely neglect the fans, which means I don't have a lot of hope for the series going forward. Not in theaters, anyway. Still, Star Wars already gave us a great original trilogy and a lesser but still quite good and underrated prequel trilogy, and that's not even getting into all the bonuses like many great games of the Clone Wars cartoon, but that's a subject for another time. I can only hope the Skywalker Saga is actually over this time. At least it ended with a meh rather than a flat-out bleh. Fortunately, The Mandalorian is still very good, and I can only hope it stays that way because I've been seriously enjoying it, and Episode 7's cliffhanger definitely had me desperate to finally see 8, which more than lived up to expectations. I hope the Kenobi series can turn out just as well, but in the meantime, that has been my review of the Skywalker Saga. Thank you so much for tuning in with me, and may the Force be with you.